Welcome to Raven Talk, the official podcast of the Raven Tribe. The Raven Tribe is a home for warriors on the path, and is dedicated to training warriors for the battlefield of life. Visit us on the web at theraventribe.com, where you can learn more information on membership, warrior training, as well as links to our official YouTube channel, Facebook group, apparel store, and our official bookstore, Marshall Books.
Welcome back, Tribe. Today we're here with special guest Michael Johnson of Shockwave Defense. Michael, how are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Now, Michael, in accordance with your request, we're going to go ahead and start the podcast a little bit differently today, and we're going to start with a prayer. So, Michael, if you would do the honors, please.
Sure. Father, as we take this time to educate men and warriors and women and teach them how to think and function with some new perspectives, we pray and ask that you'd allow for this time to glorify your name and honor you and please you with the energy that we put into this event. In Christ Yeshua's name we pray, Elohim. Amen.
Amen. Michael, great start to the podcast. Couldn't ask for better than that. So, Michael, for the audience at home, I would like to ask you to introduce yourself. Just give us a little bit of information about your background, kind of where you started in training and what's led you up to this point in your career.
Sure. I'd say my first interaction with martial arts was probably the conviction that got me started in it, which one of the first memories I have, I remember being about 5 years old and having a knife to my throat, and this individual telling me they were going to slit my throat and stuff me behind a television, which, it's a different perspective when you start life that way. Everything in life is different after that. So there were some different events that took place in my life, and I don't like feeling helpless. I don't like feeling like I can't protect myself. And I was fortunate in the fact that my dad had studied under Bruce Lee between 67 and 69. He was one of the original students of Bruce Lee in the Chinatown School in Los Angeles. And he had a really good perspective on making martial arts real. So the problem was that the way that I was still studying it at the time, I felt like it wasn't very real, like it was still very choreographed and still articulated in such a way that, people could, they could still take advantage of you if they were stronger or bigger than you. And so one of the things that really motivated me is I wanted to be able to give people a system that didn't take a tremendous amount of time to study, but was very effective against, bad people that had bad intentions and were not going to be cooperative opponents, and the psychology behind it was exactly that. I think that was kind of the foundation, was learning how to really bring a strong psychology to the martial arts and into a functional system that would work, and you didn't have to be stronger than your opponent or anything else, and kind of implementing a lot of the Jeet Kune Do principles inside of that, but also the spiritual side that accompanies that. I had a lot of people tell me when I was younger that I couldn't be a Christian and also be a martial artist, and that really upset me. So I started doing a lot of praying and also getting into the Bible and realizing that the greatest warriors that ever walked this earth were in the Bible. And so that also helped a tremendous amount, with understanding the concept. I don't really consider myself a religious person, but I am spiritual, and I like to make sure that when I'm fighting for something that it's in alignment with the principles that I stand for, and that actually drives me to be even better combatant. I think that's a big part of why people fight, is because there's conviction inside of it. You don't just fight to fight. So long story short, that's kind of how I got started, what kind of drove me into the arts and learning how to do that, and then taking it to a level of, the science world also, where I got a degree in criminology and political science, and wanted to make sure that what I was giving people was also backed by some studies that had been done in real time.
Now, Michael, I want to ask you, and this is not to take shots at anybody else in the community, but it's an unfortunate reality. There are a lot of people that hang their shingle out there. They say, yeah, this is my new system. And really, at best, they're, they have soup. They kind of have a combination of techniques, and maybe they picked up from here and there, and they put it together, and rarely I see any kind of cohesiveness to it. At the very worst, it's people that are just kind of rehashing what they already know and put a new, kind of marketing spin on it. And there really isn't anything different there per se. Now, I know that, there are exceptions to this, and I consider you to be one of those exceptions. I think you run an awesome school. You really have a real good understanding of what, real-world self-protection is. And I like to highlight, we have a lot of guests on that represent kind of the traditional martial arts community, and I'm very selective with the guests that I invite on to talk about modern self-defense, because I don't think that's something that everybody gets. And so the people I have on are people that I can vouch for, hey, they get this. So I want to ask you, you have mastership in several martial arts, traditional martial arts, but like you said, you study criminology, you look to do something that was very relevant to modern world self-defense. How did you begin your process in developing and selecting the material you wanted to share, the way you wanted to share it?
Yeah, I was in 8th grade. I fought a kid that apparently had failed the 8th grade a few times, and he was having a bad day, and I was having a bad day, and he called my mom a bitch, and I called him a loser, which were 2 hot points for us, because my mom was raising us by herself at the time, so I was really defensive of my mom. He felt he did not appreciate the fact that I called him a loser, and so we ended up fighting at lunch. And at lunch, I'm sitting there trying to do these type of forms that I had learned, and the guy nailed me in the face and broke my nose and knocked me out, and I was like, dude, that sucked. And and you end up kind of realizing, well, that didn't work the way I planned it to, in my head, and I was expecting him to come at me with these moves, because even the way I was studying at the time was very sequential, the way my dad kind of instructed us, and I don't know if he was just doing that because I was younger or what the point was, but it was this systematic approach that you do this, and then do this, and nobody fights like that in real time. And so my dad, I ended up asking him afterwards, I'm like, what would you advise me to do in my next fight? And he was like, yeah, don't get punched in the nose. And I'm like, well, that's not really helpful. So I get in this fight like literally a year later in 9th grade, and instead of using martial arts, I just used a very aggressive combination of having bad intentions towards this person and wanting to hurt them. And unfortunately, I put the kid in urgent care. So I went from one mentality of 8th grade, getting my nose broken, almost getting really hurt, worse, if the guy wanted to, he could have hurt me more because he'd knocked me out, to the year later, I ended up putting somebody in the hospital, not really learning any new techniques, but just understanding that there is a concept behind intention, that there's a concept behind the psychology, and learning how to trigger that on and off. So that was kind of, I think, what bred that, because once you get your nose broken, any man, I don't care who it is or how long ago it was, if you got in a fight and you lost, you remember. And you remember the day, you remember the person's name, you remember what happened to you, you remember how it felt as though it was yesterday, how embarrassing it was. And, in my case, of course, a bunch of people were always coming up like, I'm going to break your nose like Mondo did. They're always saying that to me. And I finally got to the point where I just nailed this one guy. I was like, well, you're not Mondo. And so kind of just had this really intense perspective on survival. So that's what kind of started it. And did a lot of street fighting when I was younger. So I got older, started doing some competition fights, some of the more traditional karate competition fights, and I was continually getting disqualified. And they were like, well, you have a lack of control and you need to demonstrate control. And it wasn't that I had a lack of control. I just didn't want to play by those rules. I wanted to fight for real. And the UFC wasn't even a thing, when I was a kid. There was nothing really like that, so you just fought to fight. As I got older into the martial arts and started taking it kind of as a business, which is it's a topic almost of its own, the whole business side of this world. But as I took it as a business, I started looking at it going, okay, how can I make this work and make it functional and really make it simplistic for people so that they can function in real time? And I got the privilege to fight against the Dog Brothers for a couple of years. We've done, off and on, and we did our own fights out here. We have our own fight group called Overpressure Combat, which is not necessarily part of my business, Vernon, because I had to separate it because my insurance kept dropping me. They were like looking at us and they're like, dude, you're doing what? You guys are hitting each other with sticks and chains. And we're like, absolutely not. We're not covering you. So I was like, come on, it's easy. Nobody's getting hurt, So I had to kind of take a different approach with that. So we opened a club that we test our stuff in real time. And why I felt that was important is that you get a lot of martial artists out there, or I would not even call these people martial artists. I think that they're kind of posers. They pose to be martial artists because real martial artists want the truth. They test the truth. And I don't care if it's a traditional system or a very advanced system. For example, I got to hang out this past weekend with Michael Jai White from Blood In, Blood Out, and he was in The Dark Knight and all that other jazz. I mean, this guy's been in a lot of movies. Very traditional in his approach to karate, but he's extremely skilled, you know, and he was showing me some of the ways that he does things, and I'm like, dude, here's a guy who's doing a system that everybody says doesn't work. Everybody likes to trash on karate, but in my opinion, I think karate is very effective depending on how you train it, right? Like, so it's not the system, it's the student. It's how you exercise this stuff. And so I got to work with him, and he was showing me how to do this, and it kind of just reinforced that behavior that how do we take a system and give it to somebody and not even really have it as a system, but a personal ownership of your identity, of how you protect yourself and take on a different, if you will, almost like a Carl Jungian archetype to switch your mind so that when you have to fight, you can become an archetype and change yourself into a different paradigm of thinking, because the way you act with your kids and your wife and your family and the people around you is going to be very different than the way you act with an opponent who's trying to take your life or take the life of a family member, et cetera. So you got to be able to turn that off and on demand. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's kind of what started it, and then how we tested it, and then we believe it's very important to test it. If you're going to give stuff to people and tell them, hey, this could save your life, you better bet your ass on that you better have tested that, because if you don't, what's going to happen? Somebody's going to die, and it's going to be your fault based on your ego, because you wanted to have the newest craze, right? You wanted to have the best system. Well, it's not about the best system. It's about saving people.
Well, that definitely gives me a lot of insight into how you look at things from a psychological point of view. Now, for the audience that may have not seen your classes before, what type of physical techniques are you using? Give me some insight into the mechanics of what you teach people for real-world self-defense. I mean, are you looking at a striking approach? Are you looking at a grappling approach, or kind of a combination?
I'm looking at a winning approach. So that being said, let me explain that. So if you were to get into a situation, where you were going against a boxer, you would not want to box a boxer, right? You're going to want to try and take that guy to an area that he's not used to functioning in. If you're getting ready to fight against a grappler, you don't want to grapple a grappler, because then they're going to win, because that's their game. So what you want to do is learn how to cheat and learn how to win. And so our approach kind of has this philosophy that's similar to that of Jeet Kune Do from Bruce Lee's system, but it's a survival-based system. So if I get down on the ground, like, I'm not fighting just to, look cool and win a trophy and win some cash and have some kind of a pride behind that. I'm fighting so I can survive. And so you want to make sure that you end these things as quick as possible, aggressively as possible, but not exceeding the amount of force that you need to in order to neutralize the threat. So, like, one of the things, and I'll tell you what I had in my mind, and I was standing in line with one of the guys at one of these gatherings, and we were fighting, and I said, hey, I see you're a Jeet Kune Do guy, because he had a Jeet Kune Do shirt on. And he goes, yeah. I said, so are you going to use Jeet Kune Do when you're fighting? And he goes, I don't know, if it comes out. And that was a really that doesn't sound like a lot, but that's monumental, what he just said. And his whole point was, if it comes out, it comes out. My job here is not to do a system, but to survive. So when I went out there, I had one thought on my mind. I was like, I'm going to hit this guy as many times as I can, as hard as I can, for as long as I can, until he quits moving. And it worked pretty good, And so instead of having a technique, your technique is based on what do you need to do for the scenario. So what we focus on more instead of techniques is application and approaches to fighting. So one of the drills I'll have is we'll have a drill where a lot of people say you can't think and fight at the same time. Well, dude, you've got a problem if you can't think and fight at the same time, right? So if you had law enforcement and you said every time you guys get attacked, you're just going to have to follow your training because you can't think and fight at the same time, it's almost insulting. It's just that's what we've done in our culture is we've dumbed down people. Yeah, but we've dumbed them down so bad, right, where they sit down and we're like, you're not smart enough to be able to think and fight. Well, you need to be. So we deliberately create drills where we try to get people to think and fight. We have one drill where we have these guys in circuit, and they'll be moving around the opponent. We'll call out a number, and one guy will ask a question, and another guy will attack you. And so you got to answer the question and deal with the attack at the same time. right? And the question, it's not like, what's the square root of pi, right? Like, we're not asking questions like that. We're asking simple questions to get the brain and the neuroplasticity, if you will, like condition, like redesign the way that those synaptic connections are built, that you can think with a threat present. And there are questions like, what's your name? We start there. What day is it? Who's the president? You know, where are we? And little things, you know, like getting people to actually function with simple questions that are not complex, but just teaching them how to stretch their comfort zone. We'll have another drill that we do called learned aggression, where we want to teach people how to be able to turn on and off aggression. I got this one from Sekou Tim Tackett, who's one of my instructors also, and he got it from a guy that was, I guess, originally in the French Foreign Legion. And we make two people fight over the right to hit another person, you know, or a bag or whatever. And so it teaches you how to get outside of the psychology of thinking of a technique and just understand that this is like, it's like a soccer game, right? If I said, what technique are you going to use to go go get a score? That's a really hard question to answer, right? Because you know your objective. Your objective is to get the ball from here down there and get it past the guy guarding the goal. So there's a skill set that we give you, right? Like you have a bunch of different skills that are in your toolbox, but you can't say which one you're going to use. You just know the objective. So more importantly, what is the objective? And how do we train to make sure you reach the objective? And do we give you the skill sets you need in order to create amazing techniques? Now, what are techniques made out of? Techniques are not made out of movements. They're made out of intention. So if somebody goes to hit you in the face with a pipe, and you go, well, that looks like that's going to suck. I don't want that to happen. And then you do something to keep that from happening. And then it also at the same time triggers an emotion that makes you aggressive. And you go, well, this guy's not going to hit me. I'm going to hit him. And that's where techniques come from, right? So everybody gets so caught up in the technique, they miss what the spirit of the technique, what created the technique. And so we have a tendency as Shockwave to focus a lot more on the spirit of the technique and how to develop those attributes. How do we develop learned aggression? How do we develop on-demand intensity? How do we develop you having a ferociousness to you that the opponent can't match? How do we develop you not being afraid to die? Which is one of the reasons why people get hurt, is they're so concerned about not getting injured that they don't do the things that they need to do in order to make sure that they injure the opponent. So you'll see some people, for example, they'll get attacked, they'll just keep blocking. Well, blocking, in essence, is already a defensive mindset. So what happens when you run from a dog or a wild animal?
You're on the defensive. You're reacting.
Right. And what's the animal going to do?
He's going to catch you.
Chase you.
Yeah, he's chasing you.
It's a predatory response, right? So what we want to do is we want to teach people that when somebody attacks you, that the objective here is not to flee, but to create a concern in the opponent for their own personal safety, right? So if you came at me with a knife and all of a sudden I start growling at you and going at you to attack you, which is always one of the things my students laugh at me at, because I'm kind of like Tarzan. I can make any animal noise, right? I tell them, look, if you get in that guy's head, you own his body. So that's what you want to do. You want to get into that point where that guy comes after you. He goes, hey, I'm going to jack you up. And you look at him and go, and he goes, what the freak just happened? What just came out of that person? And that's really the mindset. So I don't know if that answers that question, but it's more of an intense version of how to survive and then understanding the intention behind it and then whatever skill sets are necessary. Because a lot of times you're making moves up on the fly, right? You're jumping out of the plane and making your parachute on the way down. Because you're going, I got 6 guys here. I didn't take a class for this, but I know I don't want to get hurt, and I know I've got a pencil, and I know I got a fork, and I've got some athleticism. I'm going to make all 3 of those things work.
Great. Now, Michael, let me ask you, modern weapons are something that a lot of teachers tend to gloss over. Sometimes it's absent altogether. What kind of weaponry are you looking at, teaching, your students? What do you think that they need to be prepared out there in the real world?
I think it's important to have a full understanding of common weapons that are out there, edged weapons, forks, knives, I'd actually put that under edged weapons clearly, but also firearms training. We have our own shoot house next door. One of the things that we got this week is we're getting a gun simulator down at Shockwave Defense so that people can actually practice shoot and no-shoot scenarios and learning how to deal with panic responses. But it's really important to train people in firearms, although there's this concept now, I think, especially in some of the traditional arts, where they say, you should never, ever, ever pick up a gun. Well, one of the things that makes us a superior species is our ability to kill things from a distance. And if you don't understand how that works, you're going to have a significant problem on your hands. I don't care how good you are in the martial arts. If there's a guy a block away and he's got a rifle, right, and you're doing your awesome 20-hit move Mortal Kombat combination, he's going to kill you, right? So you need to be able to make some counter-offensive maneuvers against threats like that. It's important to understand the traditional weapons, too, because that type of trajectory and the way you swing like a nunchuck or parasectional sticks or whatever, however you want to call them, it's important to understand that because they help you understand your own proprioception and the relation of an external object and how it works with your body. So it's important to learn both. You know, sword fighting, you know, for a while people were saying, I'm not going to study sword fighting, everybody has guns. And then they started seeing ISIS cut all these people's heads off, and they were like, we should look at some sword fighting again. You know, so it's important to have a full spectrum. And that's really what Shockwave is. It's a full spectrum defense university. We look at everything about everything that includes everything. That's why we bring in guys from every walk of life to give specialty seminars to help people understand how to keep themselves safe.
Now, Michael, you touched on it briefly before, but tell us a little bit about the full contact weapons fighting. And again, I understand that's not formally part of Shockwave, but it's something that you are involved with. So I'd like to learn a little bit more about that, how it got started, and you know, what lessons you've learned from it.
Yeah, well, we started, my original teacher that kind of started pointing me in the right direction, ironically, I had just gone through kind of a breakup. And so I had some hostile emotions inside of me after finding out that this person that I thought was being loyal to me wasn't. And he goes, look, I think I've got a positive way for you to channel this. And he's like, I've heard of this thing. You can go out there and you can fight people. And it's a good way for you to channel that energy without you ending up in jail. And I said, okay, well, that sounds great. And so my original instructor on sticks was Felix Valencia from La Meco Eskrima. And he was teaching me a lot of moves, and that was cool. And I got the privilege to work with Arlen Sanford for a little while, and Eric Canals, who's known as Top Dog in the Dog Brothers, and et cetera, et cetera. So I got to work with some really cool guys. And the most important thing that I enjoy about the full contacts, and it's not just sticks, because we'll fight with chains, we'll fight with nunchucks. I've fought with my socks before, which is like a Thai version of the Tonfa. We'll fight with anything, is that it teaches you how strong the human psychology is. The human body changes under those conditions. That's why you see a lot of people that in a fight, joint manipulation won't work or pressure points won't work, because the body literally changes, and so does the mind and the chemical releases that are going on throughout the body. So you'll take a guy who's typically maybe 85 pounds and you'll hit him with a chair and it will not faze him at all. And that is something that is so important to the reality of defense that people need to take under consideration. They always pretend like if you hit somebody in the throat, hit them in the eyes, hit them in the groin, that these are foolproof techniques and they're always going to work. Nothing always works, except for Murphy's Law. When you expect it to work, that's often when it's going to fail. So you want to have a sequential process and a progression. And again, doing the full contact stick fighting and doing some of that stuff has actually helped us get more into the psychology of combat, because we found that if you can bring the person's mind under your control when you're fighting, ultimately that is what's going to win the fight. You get people to give up because they feel like they're in too much pain, or you make them afraid of what you're doing, make their mind go towards the concept and concern of injury. That's what makes people give up. There's three ways to shut people down: timer, switches, and mechanics, right? So I can break your bones, but if I still don't own your mind, you'll keep coming. The timer, you take a knife, you start plugging somebody, they're going to eventually bleed out, but until they get to that point, they might still keep coming. Switches are a little different. You break someone's neck or you shut off the lights, they're clearly not going to keep coming. So it's important to be able to focus on being able to, understand that psychology, but at the same time, understand how to shut people down that don't quit coming. So a lot of people are on drugs now too. And when they're fighting and it's intense, there's automatically drugs induced. And people go, well, he's not on drugs. Yes, he is. He's in a fight, which means there's a whole chemical concoction that just released into his body. So he's on drugs. He's on the type of drugs. A lot of the other techniques work very well when people aren't, they're threatening you but don't have intentions of fighting. But when both people have bad intentions, it's a whole new game.
Now, Michael, let me ask you. I mean, there's a big difference between getting hurt and getting injured. I mean, if you're doing any kind of contact training, you're going to get hurt.
Yeah.
And that lasts for a little
Right.
while, and then it goes away, and you go home and you're fine. But being injured,
Mm-hmm.
can be pretty serious. How do you do something
Mm-hmm.
at such an intense level and avoid injuries?
Yeah, when you figure that out, let me know. Because you can get injured, and that's part of the allure to it. Is I think so. Talking about mindset, Fernan. If I sat down and I trained you, and I know you've done a lot of law enforcement training, you've worked with a lot of different people in different industries. So you take a guy and you show him how to shoot, and you run him out on the range, and he's doing whatever he's doing, right? And then you put him in a situation where he's getting shot back at. Is he going to respond differently?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Why is that?
Because he hasn't trained for that.
Because he hasn't trained for that. And it's very hard to train for that because most training will not induce that type of fear for concern of people getting injured or getting hurt. And so the only way to really learn how to fight under those conditions is to be able to create an environment where we're not trying to kill each other, but we are trying to hurt each other, right? And getting hurt is a byproduct of training in martial arts. Getting injured is a byproduct of training in full combat type fights. Like you may get a broken arm, or one guy got his kneecap ripped in half when he was fighting in one of the events that they had in California. People get injured, but until you learn how to deal with that emotional and psychological enemy of concern for getting injured, you're always going to do bad in a real-time fight, right? Like there is no referee. In real time in the streets, nobody's going to come and stop and go, he's tapping. Well, nobody freaking cares. They're just trying not to get hurt themselves. How many times have you seen videos on YouTube of people with a knife stabbing one guy, and then somebody's sitting there videotaping but won't get involved? Nobody's going to stop it. So how do we put ourselves in a position, in truth, that we can really figure out what is the true spirit of combat? And the only way to do that is to allow for injury to take place. Now, there is a difference between hurt and injury. Now, I think what we're dealing with in our culture is that we have become very confused as to what our role is as warriors. And people are very concerned about getting hurt and getting injured, and primarily because of lawsuits and stuff like that. So that's why if you train in a group like that, you have to have a very cohesive bond between the other members, that they go, hey, dude, I understand what this is, and it is what it is, and we're going to go all out. So there isn't a way to fight with sticks and say, hey, nobody's going to get injured. I mean, you could get your head split open. That's going to suck. But it also gives you a different way of thinking when you train. And then when people want to fight you in the street because you trained at such a high level, and they want to challenge you, like I had an incident happen 2 weeks ago where I was at a place out here in Albuquerque called Main Event. This guy's drunk, of course, and he's running his mouth, and we're just trying to leave. And he looks at me and one of my guys, who's my lead instructor, and he goes, I'm going to put this beer down, and I'm going to kick your ass, and I'm going to kick your ass. And it was almost comical. It was like something that should have been in a movie. You look at that, and you don't feel the need to fight him because you know that this guy's drunk, right? But I also wasn't concerned for my safety, So I'm like, dude, I fight for fun, and we hit each other with weapons, right? Like, you're drunk. You cannot do anything to me. I don't want to ever underestimate anybody because it's important not to do that. But at the same time, when you go out there, you're thinking at a different level, right? So it's not like I'm going to panic and then possibly hurt this guy even worse because I'm freaking out, because it's a real fight, and put myself or him in a bad situation.
That makes sense. Now, Michael, I wanted to get your take on this. I ask everybody, it's especially interesting for me coming from a more modern approach. When you are training your students, you're giving them some really dangerous technology, okay? And I want to know how you feel about, handing over that technology to somebody that can go and potentially hurt somebody else. How do you temper that? I mean, do you have a way of training, the ideals of warriorship with your students so that you make sure that they are of the right character and have the right perspective to, be, given this, big responsibility with this information?
Absolutely. I think, that's part of us being responsible. One of the things we tell our students when they come in is that we do background checks on our students. So if you've got anything in your history, you need to let us know now. And if it's drug-related offenses, we probably, stuff like that we can work through, but if they're like, yeah, I like raped and killed somebody, they're not going to get into shockwaves. We're not going to allow that to happen. I believe in giving people second chances, but unless you have a violent offense under your belt with a lot of therapy from years and years, and there's been a lot of time that's passed, you're probably not going to get into our school. So I think the first thing is do your homework. We also make people give references when they sign up for Shockwave. They've got to give 3 to 4 people who will vouch for their character. So then we call those people and we talk to them and we ask them, hey, is this person a good person? If the person seems like they're a good person, this is from a business standpoint, it also gives you kind of a good opportunity to maybe refer that person to come down and do some training with you as well. Finally, the culture you build at your facility is ultimately what's going to outdo all of that, because human beings are human beings. There is nothing, even right now, Fernan, you're a fairly decent human being, but if we took everything from you tomorrow, you could turn into a psychopath, right? Like there's a possibility. You have children, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so God forbid this ever to happen, but let's say that something bad happened to your children, and then something bad happened to your wife. Every human being at a certain point has a breaking point, and they can switch. So what you do is you try and build a culture that keeps that behavior from getting out of control. And it's a self-correcting culture. It's a brotherhood, right? Like we all look out for each other. If somebody's going through a hard time, we embrace them and we bring them in and we say, hey, what can we do to help so that you're not going through this by yourself? Because that is that switch where people will click over and do bad things. And there's a lot of people out there that don't have a record. There's no criminal offense on them. There's nothing, and they're serial killers, right? They just haven't gotten caught yet. So how do you keep from releasing that? You train people and you feel it out and you find out that, hey, like if something doesn't feel right, you listen to that. I've had students where something just didn't feel right and I'm like, yeah, you can't train here. We're done. Something doesn't feel right. You seem like you might be a little screwed up in your head. I don't think this is the place for you, right? And you kind of have to let them go. And you also don't want to give them all of you don't want to give them the keys to the kingdom right away, right? So you kind of create a little bit of a, what do you want to call it, like an induction area where you give them some basics, you teach them some footwork, some basic stuff, and you wait to see how this person behaves before you really start giving them stuff where they could truly do damage. Because really, if you think about it, if they want to hurt somebody, you can go on YouTube, and there's plenty of YouTube videos out there absolutely for free that will teach people how to be bad people. So what we want to do is make sure that when we're trying to refine that person, that we're bringing them in as brothers and sisters inside of that culture and kind of helping form and mold them into a conductive, force inside of the universe. We want them to be conducive to helping and giving benefit back to the culture instead of just trying to suck the life out of it because they're some clown that wants to go downtown and get drunk and try and sleep with everybody and get him fights to try and prove that they are who they say they are. I mean, I have no patience for that garbage. So that's some of the ways that we deal with that.
Michael, can you tell me a little bit about the law enforcement training that you're involved with? I know that your school has a great reputation for working within the law enforcement community, and I want to get a little bit of insight into how your programs are tailored for law enforcement officers.
Yeah, so one of the things that we really focus on and we specialize in, there's a lot of guys out there that will teach joint locks and restraints and less than lethal force, and I have a lot of respect for that, and I think that that's a great element. I wouldn't take shockwave defense per se and say that, could we do that? Sure, of course we could do that, but I think where shockwave defense really shines is when we get into deadly force encounters. So one of the programs that we did for the Department of Corrections is we went out and trained all the CERT, rapid response, ERT, K-9 guys in the state of Florida and worked with those individuals and then certified them to take the knowledge back and disseminate it amongst the rest of the 18,000 officers. It's the biggest law enforcement agency in the state of Florida. And we've done that not just for them, but we've done it with other individuals as well. We've worked very closely with the Silver City Police Department. I'm good friends with the chief of police down there. Worked with several individuals in APD as well as BCSO, and we've also worked with some guys that are in special teams. And so it's important to give our law enforcement community, again, not just the techniques, but also the mentality behind it to make sure that the knowledge isn't being abused. And that being said, like our law enforcement, this, as you know, this is a totally different shift of a paradigm. There's a lot of encouragement out there to hate law enforcement. And so that can shift the tables really, really quick on these guys protecting themselves, and it being from, they're trying to restrain somebody, but the other person's trying to kill them. And I think that's what our culture doesn't understand. If somebody's trying to just punch an officer, people go, okay, well, that's a fight. But when a guy's trying to kill an officer, that's not a fight. That's an attack. And there's a very big difference, And so you've got to learn how to disseminate between those two. And that's one of the things that we really shine in as we work with law enforcement, is dealing with how do we get out of those bad scenarios when somebody's coked out of their mind and trying to kill you and stab you in the throat with a sharpened toothbrush. That's an issue, right? So, and then of course everybody looks at the cops and they only see like the last 4 minutes of the video, and they don't understand all of the previous times that officer's come out there and other incidences that have happened. And of course officers are held to a higher standard. But, I think that's where our problem is in society, is that we say we need to hold officers to a higher standard. Yeah, okay, cool. Have no problem with that. But as soon as those words come out of your mouth, you better be holding yourself to a higher standard also. Because if you don't do that, then you have made yourself subservient in the simple statement that you just made. We need to hold our culture in society to a higher standard. Not just say officers are held to a higher standard because they carry a gun. Because there's a lot of people on the street that carry a gun. Are they held to a higher standard?
No, absolutely. Very good insight.
The counter argument back is they say, well, the police are the only group of people you're not allowed to fight back against. Well, at the end of the day, that's according to man's law, right? And I get it. But nobody in their right mind, if an officer was truly doing evil, would say, you were wrong for defending yourself. If you're trying to save yourself, God gave you a law above man's law that you have the right to protect yourself and keep yourself safe from people who are trying to kill you. Right? So at the end of the day, you've got to do what is best for you and for your family, clearly. And I think most officers get that mentality. And most officers I've met and worked with are extremely professional and extremely respectful. It's just, you get 1%. I'd say it's probably even less than 1% that are racist and they use their badge to try and do bad things. But that is such a small percentage. And the reason that it has gotten out of control is because the other people that aren't holding themselves to a higher standard, they just sit there and run their mouths, and then they lose that fight. If you really have an issue with a law enforcement officer, go through the appropriate channels. That's how you really punish them. If somebody's really wronged you, take their job. Trust me, that'll hurt them far more than you running your mouth, and then somebody else comes up and another officer comes up and they see that you're running your mouth, you're trying to swing back, and then you get tased and maced and everything else, and you're like, I'm the victim. No, you're a dumbass. There's a way to handle things, So you've got to balance that stuff out.
Very true, Michael, very true. Now, Michael, before we wrap up, I want to get your personal thoughts. And I want to know if you can offer any words of advice to members of the tribe or anybody else in the listening audience as far as developing, themselves on the warrior path. If, we have aspiring warriors that are looking to walk that path, what advice can you give to them?
But I can tell you what I did, because each person has to walk their own walk. But for a long time, I was really inside of myself. I was like, what is the meaning of this life? And as warriors, we train all of this stuff, and we keep waiting for this moment to be able to exercise it and to demonstrate that we have the skill to protect the innocent. And I think that the better way of looking at that, instead of saying what is the meaning of this life, is to find a cause worth dying for. And when you find a cause worth dying for, you'll find a life worth living. And so for myself, I know that I want to protect the innocent and that I want to keep the innocent safe. And so you've got to find what your principles are and understand what your standards are, and still have an open enough mind that you're not so ignorant that you think this is based on race or this is based on ethnicity or color of people's skin. It's so much deeper than that. In reality, we are here to help each other as a species, right? And so there's always this kind of like blacks versus whites, and we see all that stuff coming back now. And if you're really a warrior, I think that you fight for humanity. not just ethnicity. You're not going to fight just for a color, because at the end of the day, when you look at all that, you're going to see that there's two groups, but it's not about race. There's have and have-nots, right? And when you're a have-not, it doesn't matter if you're black, white, Asian, Spanish, whatever. If somebody else has something that you don't have, and then they kind of group you into another area and say, we're going to go make you fight so we can keep our wealth, or we're going to make you fight so that we can do whatever, then your race is irrelevant. You know, we have a spiritual bond, and the Spirit of God has been breathed into all of us, and we need to fight to protect that. We need to fight to protect who we are as a nation. We need to fight to protect the innocent. We need to fight to protect our brothers and sisters, and then also honor those that don't get a say. You know, those that are in law enforcement, those that are in the military, that actually sometimes don't get a choice in where they go to fight. And we need to show them the support, and then also give them the support that they need when they come back home, because everybody does stuff that they regret in war. I don't care who you are or how honorable you want to act. Everybody makes decisions for those last-minute choices or last-moment choices. And we need to support each other. So as a warrior, if you truly want to claim to be a warrior in the tribe, then you need to understand that we are a family. And this is not about a system. It's not about karate being better than Guri Aragon, better than Tai Chi, better than whatever. It's really an issue, and I myself get caught up in it sometimes. I like to joke on certain systems and tease them, but it's really not because I hate the system. It's that I want to push them to better themselves. You know, like, how do we really test what we do to make it work? And so if we're really part of the warrior tribe and the warrior path, we need to actually behave as such and continue to grow ourselves spiritually, emotionally, physically, and financially, so that we can also support these endeavors that our brothers and sisters are out there trying to attain.
Well, excellent advice, Michael. I really appreciate it. And before we say goodbye and good night, I would like for you to please let the audience know where they can reach out to you if they want to go to Shockwave Defense, get some classes, if they want to bring you out for seminars, or if they want to bring you out to their agency. How can they reach out to you?
Sure. So our website is shockwavedefense.com, and defense is spelled with an S. I've had a lot of people tell me they couldn't find it, and I'm like, well, you're spelling defense with a C, and we don't live in Britain. So spell it with an S. And our telephone number is 505-554-3888. And you can reach me directly at info@shockwavedefense.com, or you can go on our Facebook page and like our Facebook page under Shockwave Defense LLC.
Great. Well, Michael, thank you for the time. It was awesome to speak with you and to catch up. Hopefully we can get you on the show again in the near future.
Thank you so much, Vernon. It was an honor and a privilege to be able to be on the show, and I appreciate what you're out there trying to do and help build our community. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.